It was just another day in the bustling city of New York, or so it seemed. The sun was shining, the streets were alive with the hum of traffic, and people hurried about their business, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. But for one woman, this day would turn out to be anything but ordinary. Her name was Evelyn Carter, a name that would soon echo through the corridors of power and privilege, though no one could have guessed it at the time. Evelyn was a woman of quiet strength, her presence commanding yet unassuming. She had seen the world from the heights of success and the depths of struggle, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen. Evelyn was on her way to a meeting, one that could change the course of her life and the lives of countless others. She was a billionaire, though she wore her wealth lightly, preferring to let her actions speak louder than her bank account. But today, her wealth would become a weapon, a shield, and a revelation that would leave one man reeling. As she walked down the street, her mind was preoccupied with the details of her upcoming meeting. She barely noticed the police car parked at the corner or the officer standing beside it, his eyes scanning the crowd with a look that was both bored and suspicious. Officer Mark Harris was a man who had seen it all, or so he thought. He had been on the force for over a decade, and in that time, he had developed a certain way of seeing the world. To him, the city was divided into two kinds of people: those who followed the rules and those who didn't. And in his mind, Evelyn Carter, with her confident stride and expensive-looking handbag, fell squarely into the latter category. He didn't know her, didn't care to know her. All he saw was a black woman who didn't belong in this part of town, and that was enough for him to make his move. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called out, stepping into her path. Evelyn stopped, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the officer's demeanor. She had been stopped before, more times than she could count, but this time felt different. There was something in his tone, something in the way he looked at her, that set her on edge. "Can I see some ID?" he asked, his voice dripping with a false politeness that did little to mask his underlying hostility. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out her driver's license. She handed it to him, her eyes never leaving his face. He took it, glanced at it briefly, and then without a word, he did something that would change everything. He pulled out a lighter, flicked it on, and held the flame to the corner of her ID. Evelyn watched in stunned silence as the plastic began to curl and blacken, the flames consuming her identity, her proof of existence, in a matter of seconds. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising in anger and disbelief. But Officer Harris just smirked, as if he had just won some kind of perverse game. "You don't need this," he said, tossing the burning ID to the ground. "People like you don't belong here." Evelyn's mind raced. She had faced discrimination before, but this was different. This was a blatant, unapologetic act of racism, a violation of her rights, her dignity, her very being. But Evelyn Carter was not a woman to be trifled with. She had built an empire from the ground up, had fought battles that would have broken lesser people, and she was not about to let this man, this so-called officer of the law, destroy her. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she asked, her voice low and steady, though her eyes burned with a fire that could not be extinguished. Officer Harris laughed, a harsh mocking sound that echoed in the empty street. "I don't care who you are," he said. "You're just another troublemaker, and I'm doing my job." But as the words left his mouth, something shifted. The air grew heavy, charged with an energy that neither of them could ignore. Evelyn reached into her bag again, this time pulling out her phone. She dialed a number, her fingers moving with a precision that spoke of years of practice. "This is Evelyn Carter," she said into the phone, her voice calm but firm. "I need you to send someone to my location immediately, and bring the press." Officer Harris's smirk faltered, replaced by a look of confusion and, for the first time, a flicker of fear. "Who are you calling?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly, but Evelyn didn't answer. She just stood there, her eyes locked on his as the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. And then, just as the first news van rounded the corner, Evelyn leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're about to find out," she said, "and when you do, you'll wish you had never crossed me." The screen fades to black, leaving the audience hanging on the edge of their seats. What happens next? Will Officer Harris face the consequences of his actions? How will Evelyn's revelation change the course of this story? The answers lie just beyond the horizon, waiting to be uncovered in the next part of this gripping tale. The sirens grew louder, their wailing cutting through the tension-filled air like a knife. Officer Harris stood frozen, his bravado crumbling as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He had expected Evelyn to back down, to walk away with her head bowed, like so many others had before her. But Evelyn Carter was not like the others. She was a force of nature, a woman who had clawed her way to the top in a world that had tried to keep her down at every turn. And now, as the first news van screeched to a halt just a few feet away, she was about to show the world exactly who she was. Evelyn's story was one of resilience, of triumph over adversity. She had been born into poverty, raised in a neighborhood where hope was a scarce commodity. But even as a child, she had dreamed of something more. She had seen the way the world worked, the way it favored some and discarded others, and she had vowed to change it. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, failures, moments when she had wanted to give up. But she had kept going, driven by a determination that was as unyielding as it was fierce. By the time she was in her 30s, Evelyn had built a multi-billion-dollar empire. She was the CEO of Carter Global, a company that specialized in renewable energy and sustainable technology. Her work had earned her accolades, awards, and the respect of some of the most powerful people in the world. But despite her success, Evelyn had never forgotten where she came from. She had used her wealth and influence to give back to her community, funding schools, hospitals, and programs designed to lift people out of poverty. She was a living testament to the power of perseverance, a beacon of hope for those who had been told they would never amount to anything. But none of that mattered to Officer Harris. To him, she was just another black woman, another statistic, another face in a crowd that he had been trained to distrust. He had no idea who she was, no idea of the storm he had just unleashed. And as the reporters began to pour out of the van, their cameras trained on the scene before them, he realized, too late, that he had made a terrible mistake. "Ms. Carter," one of the reporters called out, shoving a microphone in her direction. "Can you tell us what's going on here?" Evelyn turned to face the camera, her expression calm but resolute. "I was just assaulted by this officer," she said, her voice steady. "He burned my ID, accused me of being a troublemaker, and told me I didn't belong here. But I do belong here, and I'm not going to let him or anyone else make me feel otherwise." The reporters turned their attention to Officer Harris, their questions coming fast and furious. "Officer, can you explain your actions? Do you realize who you're dealing with? What do you have to say for yourself?" Harris stammered, his face pale, his hands trembling. He tried to defend himself, to explain away his actions, but the words caught in his throat. He had no defense, no excuse. He had acted on impulse, driven by prejudice and arrogance, and now he was paying the price. But the drama was far from over. As the cameras rolled and the crowd began to gather, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. The door opened and out stepped a man in a sharp suit, his expression grim. He was Evelyn's lawyer, a man known for his ruthlessness in the courtroom and his unwavering loyalty to his clients. He walked over to Evelyn, his eyes scanning the scene with a practiced ease. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. Evelyn nodded. "I'm fine," she said. "But we need to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The lawyer turned to the reporters, his voice cutting through the noise like a whip. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing here is a gross abuse of power," he said. "My client, Ms. Evelyn Carter, was subjected to an unprovoked and racially motivated attack by this officer. We will be pursuing legal action not just against him, but against the entire department. This kind of behavior cannot and will not be tolerated." The crowd erupted into murmurs, the tension in the air palpable. People were angry, outraged, but also hopeful. They had seen Evelyn's story, had followed her rise to success, and now they were seeing her stand up to injustice in a way that was both powerful and inspiring. But there were also those who were skeptical, who wondered if this was just another publicity stunt, another way for a wealthy person to grab the spotlight. As the lawyer continued to speak, Evelyn's mind was already racing ahead. She knew that this was just the beginning, that the fight was far from over. She had seen how these things played out, how the system worked to protect its own. But she also knew that she had the resources, the influence, and the determination to see this through to the end. She was not just fighting for herself, she was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin, their gender, or their background. But even as she stood there, surrounded by cameras and reporters, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. Why had Officer Harris targeted her? Was it just a random act of racism, or was there something else at play? She had made enemies over the years, powerful people, who didn't like the way she did business, who saw her as a threat to their own interests. Could this be part of a larger plan, a way to discredit her, to bring her down? The questions swirled in her mind, but there was no time to answer them now. The lawyer was wrapping up his statement, and the reporters were already clamoring for more. Evelyn knew that she had to stay focused, to keep her emotions in check. This was not just about her, it was about something much bigger. It was about justice, about equality, about the kind of world she wanted to leave behind for future generations. As the crowd began to disperse and the cameras were turned off, Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling herself for the battles to come. She knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But she also knew that she was not alone. She had her team, her supporters, and most importantly, her unwavering belief in what was right. And as she walked away from the scene, her head held high, Evelyn Carter knew one thing for certain. This was not the end. It was just the beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next. But what would come next? Would Officer Harris face justice, or would the system protect him as it had so many others? Would Evelyn's fight for equality and justice inspire others to stand up and speak out? Or would it be buried under the weight of bureaucracy and indifference? The answers were still unclear, the future still uncertain. But one thing was certain: Evelyn Carter was not going to back down, not now, not ever. And as the screen fades to black once more, the audience is left with a sense of anticipation, of curiosity, of hope. What will happen next? How will this story unfold? The answers lie just beyond the horizon, waiting to be discovered in the next chapter of this gripping tale. The fallout from the incident spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the video of Officer Harris burning Evelyn's ID had gone viral. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like Justice for Evelyn and #End Police Brutality, and the story dominated the news cycle. People were outraged, not just by the officer's blatant act of racism, but by the fact that someone as accomplished and respected as Evelyn Carter could still be treated this way. It was a stark reminder that no matter how high you climbed, the color of your skin could still make you a target. But while the public outcry grew, behind the scenes, things were far more complicated. Evelyn's legal team was working around the clock, gathering evidence, filing lawsuits, and preparing for what promised to be a long and grueling battle. The police department, meanwhile, was scrambling to contain the damage. They issued a statement condemning Officer Harris's actions and promising a full investigation. But many saw it as nothing more than lip service. The department had a history of protecting its own, and few believed that this time would be any different. For Evelyn, the days that followed were a whirlwind of interviews, meetings, and strategy sessions. She was determined to use this moment to push for real change, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. The system was designed to resist change, to protect the status quo, and she was up against forces far more powerful than one rogue officer. But Evelyn was no stranger to uphill battles. She had faced them her entire life, and she wasn't about to back down now. As the legal battle heated up, new details began to emerge that added layers of complexity to the story. It turned out that Officer Harris had a history of complaints against him, most of which had been dismissed or swept under the rug. There were allegations of excessive force, racial profiling, and even bribery, but none of it had ever stuck. He had been protected by the system, shielded by a code of silence that extended far beyond his precinct. But now, with the spotlight firmly on him, that protection was starting to crack. Meanwhile, Evelyn's team uncovered something even more troubling. It seemed that Officer Harris hadn't acted alone. There were rumors of a larger conspiracy, of powerful figures who had a vested interest in seeing Evelyn discredited or even destroyed. These were people who had benefited from the status quo, who saw Evelyn's success as a threat to their own power. They had deep pockets, connections in high places, and a willingness to do whatever it took to protect their interests. Evelyn's lawyer, a sharp and seasoned litigator named Marcus Reed, was the first to raise the possibility. "This isn't just about one bad cop," he told her during one of their strategy sessions. "This is about something much bigger. Someone wanted this to happen, Evelyn. Someone wanted to send a message." Evelyn listened, her mind racing. She had always known that her success came with a target on her back. But this was something else entirely. This was personal. As the investigation deepened, Evelyn found herself drawn into a web of intrigue and danger. She began receiving anonymous threats both online and in person. Her office was vandalized, and her staff reported being followed. It was clear that someone was trying to intimidate her, to make her back down. But Evelyn wasn't the kind of person who could be intimidated. If anything, the threats only strengthened her resolve. She was more determined than ever to see this through, no matter the cost. But the stakes were higher than she had realized. As Marcus dug deeper, he uncovered evidence of corruption that went all the way to the top. There were politicians, business, leaders, even judges who were implicated in a network of bribery, blackmail, and coercion. It was a system designed to keep the powerful in power and the marginalized in their place. And Evelyn, with her wealth, her influence, and her unshakable commitment to justice, was a threat to that system. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous it became. Marcus urged caution, warning Evelyn that they were playing with fire. "These people don't play by the rules," he told her. "If they feel cornered, they'll do whatever it takes to protect themselves." But Evelyn refused to back down. She had come too far, fought too hard to let fear dictate her actions. She was determined to expose the truth, no matter the personal cost. As the tension mounted, Evelyn found herself grappling with questions that went beyond the immediate conflict. What did it mean to be a person of color in a system that was stacked against you? What did it mean to succeed in a world that didn't want you to? And what did it mean to fight for justice in a society that often seemed indifferent to it? These were questions that had no easy answers, but they were questions that Evelyn was determined to confront, both for herself and for others. The story was no longer just about one incident, one officer, or even one woman. It was about a system that was broken, a society that was divided, and the people who were fighting to change it. Evelyn's fight had become a symbol, a rallying cry for those who had been silenced, ignored, or oppressed. And as the battle raged on, it became clear that this was not just her fight. It was everyone's fight. But the road ahead was fraught with danger. The forces arrayed against Evelyn were powerful, ruthless, and determined to protect their interests. At all costs, the threats against her grew more frequent, more brazen, and it was clear that the stakes were higher than ever. Evelyn knew that she was walking a tightrope, that one misstep could have devastating consequences. But she also knew that she couldn't stop, not now, not when so much was at stake. As the screen fades to black once more, the audience is left with a sense of anticipation, of unease, of hope. What will happen next? Will Evelyn be able to expose the truth, or will the forces arrayed against her prove too powerful? Will justice prevail, or will the system once again protect its own? The answers are still unclear, the future still uncertain. But one thing is certain. Evelyn Carter is not going to back down. Not now, not ever. And as the story continues to unfold, the audience is left on the edge of their seats, eager to see what happens next. The tension is palpable, the stakes are high, and the outcome is anything but certain. But one thing is clear. This is a story that will stay with them long after the screen goes dark.